Good evening. I'm Brian Stork, and I'm here with my friends and colleagues, David Miller at the University of Michigan, Dr. Jim Monty, Joe Salas, and Matt Smith, a resident here at the University of Michigan, and soon going to be joining us at West Shore Urology in Muskegon, Michigan. And we're going to talk about the music program, the Michigan Urology Surgical Improvement Collaborative. Did I say that right?
You got it right, exactly.
All right, that's a mouthful. And so I thought I'd start with you, Dr. Miller. Can you tell us a little bit about what music is?
Well, thanks. It's great to be here tonight, Brian, Joe, Matt, Dr. Monty. Music is a collaborative or consortium of right now about 29 practices throughout the state of Michigan, urologists in both community and academic-based practice that share a common goal of improving the quality and also the cost efficiency of care for men with prostate cancer throughout the state, with the ultimate goal of making men with prostate cancer, allowing them to have better, longer lives. And I think there's a recognition that, as prostate cancer care has evolved over the last few decades, there are some areas where we can strive to get better, improvements in treatment outcomes, improvements in how we counsel patients about decision making, and there's a tremendous will on the part of the urology community across the state to get better in all of those areas. So it's really an infrastructure that's allowing us to combine evidence-based medicine, collaborative learning from the experience of urologists across the state in a way that will ultimately lead us to make Michigan the best place in the world, we hope, to get prostate cancer care.
And Dr. Monty, there's a story behind how music came about. I think you guys had done some earlier work.
Yes, when Dave Miller was a resident, we had talked about this and were interested in doing something like it. There are a number of other quality improvement collaboratives across the state of Michigan, and we felt that in urology we were a bit behind and that we had not been involved in any of these. Almost all of these other collaboratives, though, were hospital-based. In urology, it made a lot more sense to be practice-based because so much of what we do is an outpatient. So when Dave got back from his fellowship, we looked into it more and started another group of included some former residents from U of M, and got some experience in looking at this collaborative sort of learning. And then with that experience, David wrote a grant to Blue Cross and Blue Shield to become one of the quality improvement collaboratives in Michigan. And so we were able to to expand from a lot of the experience had in other specialties, learn from them, and then add our own particular nuance to it that fit better with urology.
And Dr. Miller, can you tell me currently what are the clinical questions or conundrums that we're trying to solve with the music program?
It's a great question. I mean, our hope is that a lot of what we work on in the collaborative is that comes from the clinical challenges that urologists face every day. And in fact, many of our priorities are. For instance, one of the big challenges in our field right now is how we reduce the rates of infections for patients undergoing prostate biopsy to help with the diagnosis of prostate cancer. There's been a huge literature suggesting that rates of hospitalizations after biopsy are rising, and there was a lot of interest on the part of urologists in the collaborative to understand that issue a little bit better and then try to improve it. And so across the state, we studied what happens to patients when they're hospitalized, what the causative bacteria are, and we're now implementing strategies throughout the state to either know about some of these resistant organisms ahead of time and treat them accordingly, or to expand the antibiotics we use to reduce those infections. So that's one example of the priorities we have, which is to reduce biopsy-related infections. But just if not more importantly, we are tackling some issues in how do we achieve the best use of imaging studies for patients newly diagnosed with prostate cancer, make sure that those patients who are at high risk of having spread of the cancer get the right imaging, but perhaps avoiding some studies when they're unlikely to be positive. We're also starting to create an infrastructure to help us understand and improve patient outcomes after surgery for prostate cancer. Arguably, in the field of urology, radical prostatectomy or surgery for patients with prostate cancer is the signature operation that we do, and we think if we can measure how patients do, share that information together, learn from each other from the cumulative experience that's developed over the years, we can make the road after radical prostatectomy easier, smoother, and help patients get back to their life more quickly. And then I think finally, we all recognize that initial decision when someone's faced with a prostate cancer diagnosis is a difficult one. A lot of factors weigh into it, but I think soliciting and involving the patients fully in those decisions and helping them make better decisions is something that we all are very interested in and we're working toward quite expeditiously.
And can I just ask you a follow-up question? We're sponsored, or it sounds like we receive funds from Blue Cross Blue Shield to do this program. Can you tell us how you think Blue Cross Blue Shield benefits and what their involvement is as a sponsor?
Well, I think Blue Cross Blue Shield of Michigan in many ways is unique around the country in that there's some medical leadership there that really views physician-led learning and physician-led collaboration as the pathway forward to getting to better value and better outcomes in healthcare. So the idea is that if Blue Cross supports and unleashes physicians and their expertise and their interest in improving patients' lives, that we can identify, as I've discussed, and then tackle some of these big challenges. Blue Cross believes that ultimately that will not only improve the lives of their beneficiaries, which is one of their major missions, but in unleashing this physician expertise and creating an infrastructure for improvement, it will ultimately there will ultimately be a business case for that. And in fact, they've been able to show in a number of the different collaboratives that when physicians work together, they can reduce complication rates after major surgery. Fewer complications means fewer expenditures around the hospitalizations and ultimately cost savings for the system.
Sure. And I'm curious, with Dr. Smith, Dr. Salas, and Dr. Monty, there's a meeting tomorrow, as I understand it. There's meetings from time to time about the program for academic doctors and the community practitioners to get together. Dr. Monty, can you tell us a little bit about that meeting, and then maybe I'll ask Dr. Salas and Dr. Smith what their impressions are of those meetings?
Sure. Of these 29 practices, it's a mixture of both private practice urologists and academic urologists, and it's also a mixture of practices of varying different sizes, from small ones with 1 or 2 people to a couple groups that are 40 or 50 people. So it's a very diverse group of different types of practices. The meeting tomorrow, we have 3 meetings a year where we bring together the clinical champion. There's one individual in each practice who's been named the clinical champion, who tries to spearhead the activities in that particular practice. So the clinical champion comes, the data abstractor, data manager from each practice comes, and often an administrative person from each practice. So tomorrow we're going to have almost 100 people at the meeting, including about 35 urologists from around the state representing all the different practices. So we have this meeting 3 times a year, bring everyone up to speed with many of the projects that we're working on, start some of the shared learning, provide the feedback to the practices, discuss what we're going to be doing next and what future areas we might work on. So it's, I think people have gotten very much engaged with the whole process.
And is that your experience as well, Dr. Salas? Do you think as a community urologist that there's a lot of shared learning going on and engagement?
Certainly. I in my practice have viewed 2 separate branches of urology, academia and clinical practice. And I think the borderline between those 2 types of practices has been blended a bit with this, with the music program. It's interesting that in academia, one of the things that is always accomplished is review of your data, accumulation of the data, trying to figure out what to do with the information you have absorbed, and then producing papers. Well, in the clinical practice, it's very difficult to collect data. It's difficult to act on the data, and so we wait for the papers to come out from academia to read and figure out what it is to do about various problems that you might encounter every day. Well, this is a direct linkage between academia and private practice, and it's not punitive. The information that we gain from our constructive criticism is not punitive, it's constructive. And I think that's one of the most exciting things about our connectivity between these two groups.
Sure. And Dr. Smith, there's a word that I learned just a few days ago called cooperation. Apparently the kids who are involved in robotics work together, but they compete against each other. And so I'm wondering, residents always have a interesting view, a special view on things. I'm wondering if you see competition and cooperation going on at these meetings, or if you see more of one or the other.
I think it's generally cooperation. But I think as surgeons, there's always some competition there, and I think it's a healthy competition. I've been to a couple of the meetings where we've discussed different strategies to minimize infections after prostate biopsies, and a few of the practices have brought up novel ideas that they've been using out in the community, and obviously they are big champions of those and want to bring them to the bigger group, and so I'm looking forward to continue that on and kind of transitioning from the academic center to the community center next year. Echoing some of what Dr. Salas has said.
And if I could just follow up on that, I think that's one of the beauties of the collaboratives is that the idea that it's really bi-directional. There is no kind of lock on new knowledge or expertise or innovation that comes from an academic center. There's a huge amount that's been learned by urologists in practice for 30 or 40 years.
Good point, yeah.
Tricks of the trade that improve patients' lives and outcomes, that this now creates an infrastructure for sharing that information and kind of, all that's been kind of learned in day in and day out patient care for a long time. This creates an infrastructure for sharing that, disseminating it, and the innovation and the value comes from both sides without question. So while the traditional model might be academic data leads to a publication, leads to the dissemination, this creates a whole new model where boots on the ground experience leads to clinical innovation, and that information is shared in a way that benefits patients. So I think that's, for me, one of the most exciting parts of this.
I think one of the exciting things for me is I'm truly boots on the ground. I'm not our clinical leader or anything, but it's exciting for me to see everybody so excited about this project and the way it's kind of bringing everybody together. And we're already seeing some of the fruits of it in our practice. We had a data point that was off a while back, and it generated a very heated discussion amongst the partners as to how we could improve our practice and what was going on.
That's the fascinating thing, is that when we all have our perceptions for how our results are or how our outcomes are. If you see some data, though, that's believable, that may suggest that, geez, somebody might be doing it better than I am, it makes you think twice. And surgeons are a pretty competitive lot. And I think if they can be shown data that shows there's a better way to do it, they will try to get better. Right. And there's a very strong drive inherently, I think, in physicians and particularly in surgeons to do that.
And I think the other thing in bringing these, so many groups together, what happens is that certain practices are better in certain areas. And so, while one practice may be able to teach us the best way to do a prostate biopsy, another may ultimately be able to help us learn the best way to reconnect the bladder and the urethra during a robotic prostatectomy. And if we were only looking within our own groups, the amount of kind of variation that we could capitalize on, not just describe or criticize, but actually capitalize on to get better would be a lot less. And I think that's the beauty of it. No one has a lock on quality across every domain, and that allows us to kind of borrow best practices from across a really diverse group of practices and experiences.
Sure.
An add-on to that is that in the old days it would be where two surgeons would work on the same case together, and you'd learn from each other. The economic constraints that are being put on us now, the surgeon is pretty much independent in every operating room, and it's hard to compare and hard to take notes with each other with that environment. So it's good to have a bigger group of data being able to go back and forth to learn from.
Well, did you, Dr. Miller, have anything else you wanted to add to the discussion before we wrap it up?
I guess I would just say to add to what what Joe said, to think about why this works is, there's some secret sauce to the combination of the relationships, the data, the fact that we are competitive and we all want to get better, in many people, some people have described it, and Dr. Monti really was the first one to think about the collaboratives in this way, although it's been described and written about by others. But we finish residency and we don't have a coach, And if you look at, Rafa Nadal or Roger Federer or Kobe Bryant, the best pianists in the world, they have a coach. They have someone who evaluates what they're doing and helps them get better. And then Atul Gawande, who's a surgeon at Harvard, has written about this quite eloquently. But what the collaborative does is it provides us with a kind of, for lack of a better term, a community of coaches to think about how we provide care, to offer constructive feedback that we can go and take and improve on, and then close the loop and see if we're actually getting better.
In a non-threatening way,
Yeah.
that there's a certain degree of anonymity that protects you, but on the other hand, you sort of know what you're doing and what your standards are going to be. And so it's a reassuring enough environment that allows it not to be threatening.
And I think that as an outsider is the key to the whole thing, is it's not threatening, it's positive, and it's just a way for us all to get better, provide better care across the state. So it's really exciting, and I think we all thank the two of you and the team here from the University of Michigan for your futuristic thinking and putting it together.
Well, and I would just close by thanking, the urologists around the state who've kind of embraced it, become engaged, and the amount, the desire to kind of, provide better care is very strong. And I think the relationships from the collaborative have had some, spillover effects into communication about patient care in other settings. And I think it's an exciting time to be a urologist in Michigan.